And thank you all, and to the team in Dublin, and especially to Tim for inviting me to join you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and especially because I know there are lots of, I think, some of our former collaborators and people we worked with over the last year and a half who are here, and it's nice to see you again. I hope to catch up a little later. So I'm going to speak for about 25 minutes about a couple of things. The big theme of the talk is about designing for data, lessons from global sprints. And this is something actually I've been talking about a lot because it's a program that we've been taking around the world, as Heather said, to look at how do you do design for data-driven services. And obviously, Facebook has loads of work to do in that area. We have challenges from our own platform, work that we're doing with our own product. And you know, you'd have to be asleep for a few years not to recognize that. We certainly recognize that, and we're doing lots of work around it. But I'm speaking about something today that's more about the wider ecosystem, some of the challenges that we share with other tech companies, sure, but actually probably with a lot of you. With anyone who's interested in applying design thinking to kind of big challenges and trying to do things in a new way, because this is a problem that really needs to be looked at in a new way. And I wanted to focus today a bit more on the lessons we've learned, right? So speaking to an audience like this, it's actually a real pleasure to say, you know, what are the things we've internalized and learned and iterated on as we've worked through our kind of methodology of sprints, the tools that you're often using probably every day. So I'm kind of looking forward to sharing that. Hopefully, they're maybe useful. I'm going to implicitly as well give a bit of a pitch for collaborate with us, use our toolkit, and maybe offer you some things that could be helpful in your own work. So yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to speak first about the problem we're trying to solve. And it's one that I think touches almost everyone in the world, what we've been doing about it. Although I'm going to really breeze over that, and I can share some resources if you want to learn more about the kind of methodology and tools and the approach we've used. I'm going to focus on what we've learned. So how we've really changed what we're doing, or what we're doing that might in some ways confront service design a little bit, or in other ways might build on it in a certain context. And then very briefly on what's next. So all around the world, people are using digital services that are becoming a much bigger part of people's lives. This is an old story from mapping apps that use location data to give you information about how long your commute is, to weather apps that tell you if it's going to rain on your way into work, which is especially useful in Ireland, I can tell you, and are extremely popular here. But there's a big challenge. There is, by the way, in my keynote, this P. This P appears again and again. We've managed to find it and delete it before it keeps cropping up, so forgive the P. So as we've developed these services, they've become more and more complex, more and more sophisticated, more and more useful, a bigger part of people's lives. But also, to be honest, people's understanding of them, of how they work, hasn't kept pace. So people have these incomplete understandings of how their personal data may offer. Sorry, I need to stand closer to this, I'm realizing, to keep this working. Excuse me, I'm sorry. The team here are really slick. They know exactly what they're doing, and I'm wandering around the stage. Complex services, more sophisticated and useful, but like limits in understanding. And that's a really big problem. Like on the one hand, it's not that important that everyone knows the nuts and bolts, the plumbing of every data-driven service that they use. But there's a really big risk if they don't understand the basics, the driving forces behind that. Arthur C. Clarke had this quote about 50 years ago now. He said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This is one that's repeated in like a million contexts really, really frequently, and we all probably use. But if you think about it, it's actually kind of an interesting one. Because even as Steve Jobs might have spoken about experiences that are magic, magic has other properties as well. So magic can be delightful and surprising, but it can also be scary and hard to understand, hard to feel confident about. And may even lead to disquiet or unease. Because if you don't know how the magic is happening, it's very hard for you to feel in control. And if you're not in control when something happens, it's really hard for you to take action that feels right, or to understand how you're protected from risk, or to understand what you can do in a different context. So we have a big challenge to solve around that, because in the world of kind of data and data-driven services, if things become too much like magic, If those two paths diverge, more sophisticated, more complex services become even less comprehensible to people. And meanwhile, we don't build better tools to help people understand that stuff. We're at a huge risk that people will maybe use digital services, use services driven by their data, but never feel really good about it. And that downstream effect of that, discomfort, disquiet, whatever service you're designing in whatever industry, as you think about personalization, as you think about digitization, as you think about making it more sophisticated, will have a friction that could be really, really costly. And costly for people every day about how they feel about it. Let's look at the evolution of UX for a second. So without aging yourselves, age yourselves a little bit. How many of you are familiar with this interface? If I can throw out to the audience, what's happening here? It's not beautiful, but we have a couple of, there's a small interaction. Anyone? Waiting for command, absolutely. So I'm waiting. What else? Location, yeah, so it's telling you where the cursor is. Yeah, absolutely. What else?
It's doing something.
Absolutely, it's doing something, and I'd go more specific than that, is that on an interface that's effectively a black screen, it's saying, I am turned on. I am active. So this is like a simple interface, but even as it is, it's telling us quite a few things like focus your attention here, I'm waiting for something, and I am active. Let's fast forward a couple of years, maybe 20 years, and let's look at this is the kind of spinning wheel kind of animation, but you know the hourglass kind of animation that's a few years earlier is really similar. What's it doing? It's saying waiting, loading, processing, absolutely. So it's kind of like the work is happening, bear with us, and it's ongoing. And I remember with great distaste, you know, that sense of having like your cursor turned into an hourglass, and you had this really frustrating experience of being able to move a cursor around, not click on anything, know that you're waiting for something, not be able to do anything about it, and you're like, who's in control here? So we're familiar with this. Let's shoot forward maybe another 15 years to kind of a modern mobile UX. What's happening here? Yeah, skeleton screens, which tell us what?
It's teasing you.
Yeah, teasing you with the kinds of content you're going to get. A skeleton screen to say what content's going to go where. So even though it doesn't have the content yet, it's saying like, don't worry, we're going to give you text here, an image here, a video here. What else is happening? Yeah, it's pulling it from somewhere, but you know, similar to the hourglass, there's a bit of a, I'm at work, right? You know, there are things you can't contest. The internet is faster, for sure, or processes work better, but there's still sometimes a wait. But it's giving us information in a logical way, right? It's saying we read from the top to the bottom, typically. So I'll load information from the top to the bottom, dynamically fetching that content in a way that's intelligent and giving you a better experience. And it's doing it all in the context of saying, like, this is where you are, this is where home is, these are the controls that you have. There are common kind of formats for like your 3 dots to say you can control here, even for kind of social or your personal thing, the plus to add. Like, there are expectations people understand and get from this. And then there's also kind of like intuitive and clever approaches to how to give you the content. And while for us, this is all very familiar, maybe too familiar if we look at our screen time stats from recent apps. And it would be easy to think that, you know, going from the left-hand side of the screen to the right was trivial and obvious and a simple evolution. But in fact, it's not, right? Going from the left to the right was the process of an enormous amount of failed experiments, of testing, of dead ends probably along the way. And nobody, probably in 1982, who was the most brilliant person, the most insightful, the greatest foresight, could probably have really accurately foreseen what we have on the right and how we'd interact with it, right? Now, in retrospect, it's really easy to go back and say, like, of course they'd do it. You know, anyone could have come up with this. But it's really, really difficult to predict the path of technology and use in a precise way, and to do it in a way that relates to kind of these subtle interactions. So if you look at that space and think about all that process of iteration, prototyping, success, and failure, things that seem like they have a lot of potential, maybe not washing out, other things that maybe started small, becoming kind of familiar, becoming understood, being replicated across different services. Let me ask you about the world of data transparency, people feeling like they're in control of data. Are we more on the left-hand side of the screen or the right? Yeah, I think we're like pretty far to the left. Still in some pretty kind of rudimentary patterns and interactions. And that level of sophistication, that kind of like prototyping and success and failure and the iteration that's gone into that hasn't happened as much there. And there's lots of reasons for it, but it's not a trivial or simple thing to resolve. Even the kind of very well-intentioned efforts. So if many of you, how many of you here are in the EU, or typically are in the EU? Yeah, so most of the audience will be familiar with cookie notices, a lot of the notices you had when GDPR came in, lots of interstitials, lots of kind of warnings. And some of these, they're very well-intentioned efforts to give people like better understanding. But one, the fact that they all came in from the different services on the same day or week wasn't terrifically helpful. So that's not the best way to do things. But also, like, generally aren't giving people a great service. This is not super sophisticated about like educating people about how their data is used, putting them in control, right? We're at kind of a basic level of, to be honest, like kind of legal and compliance-driven interactions. So even those well-intentioned efforts haven't added up to much, as important as they might be. And we've seen this shift from desktop to mobile and all the extra complexity that offered. Many of you probably working sometimes with those challenges. You've got a smaller screen, you've got less space to work with, you need to think about text, but also the way people are interacting with their device is really different. You don't sit down and have an hour of screen time. You have a person who throughout their day is probably interacting with their device hundreds of times, taking it out, having a quick look, using it in different models, doing some focused work in a particular app, using it passively, and it's engaging with them rather than them engaging with it. And a million other different changes. I won't dwell. But now we have all these other modes of interaction, whether it's through voice, VR, wearables, driverless cars. Imagine the challenges we've faced about thinking about how we communicate with people about their data, going from desktop to mobile, which was basically squeeze it in, like make it smaller, and then think about these interactions so there maybe isn't even a screen. People are interacting with it in new and different ways again. So it's really, really clear there needs to be a bit of step change across every service about how this is done. And one of the problems is that we've tended to look at it as a motivation problem, which is, and it's fair probably to be cynical sometimes, but broadly, like companies don't care to give me information about this. So in the face of, I won't say failure, but a lack of success, it's kind of their fault, they're not trying hard enough. But actually, if you look across all of the different services, different companies, different methodologies and approaches, different approaches to using data, there are a few examples of great success. Lots of examples like in specific areas, this piece works well, or someone's doing this really well. But across the industry, there hasn't been a lot of innovation. And what I want to do today is challenge you to think about the entire ecosystem of data transparency, trust, control across every service as a single service design challenge. How do you service design an ecosystem for this that moves from being about motivation to being about innovation? What would that look like? How would you do it? What are the challenges you'd face? And that's a bit of the work that we've been doing. So we've been traveling around the world, not just traveling around the world, but being very focused on our own work as well. But as part of that, talking to people in different countries, cultures, legal systems, different kind of approaches to technology and interaction with services, different levels of understanding or engagement from people about their data and culture. Running design sprints focused on these challenges, on data trust, transparency, and control. And bringing together a really wide group of constituencies to run quite short sprints to look at those problems and to try to prototype new solutions. I could stand here all day and speak about the specifics of how we've done that, who was there, the kinds of interactions and the kinds of patterns that came out of those things. But I'm going to share with you a place where you can find all that. So I'm going to use the time instead to speak about some of the things we've learned as we've done it. Is that OK? But suffice to say, so amongst this like kind of global tour, we've been to Paris 3 times. We've been to quite a few other countries that are running smaller events. And we've done a huge amount of work inside our company as well, and with other companies. And then sometimes also we started to work kind of on demand from partners, helping other companies apply our kind of toolkit and methodology, working with regulators and government to help them to use some of the same approaches. And I know that Tim mentioned to me that there are quite a few people from public organizations here who are thinking about these same challenges for government. And that's really critical, right? Because it's easy to see how the same challenges are faced as we think about how a data-driven society and all the value that can add, potentially, those same challenges need to be overcome. So I'll kick on. So 5 lessons we learned on the way. So first of all, I changed this from break down silos, which is probably the most common slide ever in decks, to break all the silos. I'm going to talk a bit about what that is, but the silos we broke down immediately were like getting policymakers in the room, right? To talk about like what's the actual objective of policy in this area? To talk to product makers, designers, academics, privacy specialists, and lawyers. And somewhat uniquely, we've actually been quite successful at bringing those groups together. And it's really kind of interesting that you have 2 large constituencies of people. And I'll focus on 2 of these. But if you think about lawyers, and within them I'll include, say, privacy specialists, who are mostly lawyers as well, right? Privacy is a legal discipline most commonly. And then I'll include, like, say, design, and then academics in this space are often lawyers as well, although increasingly they're computer scientists who are interested in this area, social scientists. And then the kind of like product makers, designers, they're coming at the same problem from really different angles, and they face different kind of challenges, but they also have different tools. And one of those is that, I don't need to tell you this, how many of you, by the way, as designers, have worked with lawyers? Would you say, put your hand up if you think it's really easy. Okay, put your hand up if you'd say it's in the middle. Put your hand up if you'd say it's one of the, and lawyers are amazing people, but without judging any group of people, that it, like, somewhere in the kind of the background of the discipline, it's somewhat challenging to a kind of design and like person-led approach. Yeah, so there's a bit of evidence from that, but I think that's borne out by people working inside companies, people working in any kind of space, that like these are really quite different views of the same problem, but they have to actually come together because people experience the law often through the services they use and through the kind of regulatory warnings and notices that they get, which is a lot of their information about data. So we brought these groups together. And we kind of tried to bridge the cultures, get them talking in the same language. And we heard really interesting things like, privacy specialists, academics who'd worked for 30 years in privacy had never tried to actually draw an interface, had never thought like what their very accurate and thoughtful legal analysis actually could potentially look like in an interface people interacted with, and what the limits and constraints of that were. So that was quite, like even just in that, it's like a light bulb moment. In the way that like lots of sprints can do that kind of well, but the further apart those constituencies are, the more challenging they are, the better it can be when you bring them together and they go, oh my God, I get this. I actually understand this a little bit better. And the 2 things that really changed how they thought about it were, 1, they had no concept of rapid prototyping. That's not a concept that exists in law. In fact, prototyping is not really a concept that exists in legal thinking because it's about comprehensiveness and accuracy, and there is a correct way to do it. And you might take some time to get there, but you're not really probably prototyping to get there because that allows for mistakes. And when you can't make mistakes, you're a lawyer. And then the second big area, I've forgotten that point because I forgot what I was talking about. We'll come back to it. We'll figure it out. The second thing we did was instead of focusing on just a single, like yes, these different kind of disciplines, but also different companies. So yes, our company has lots of interest in this space, but we worked with about 60 other companies, 50 policy and academic organizations, 25 design partners all around the world, and really kind of started to say, this is not a tech company problem. It may be predominantly, or we may be at the front of those challenges today, but actually, if you think about the path of technology, how services are evolving, I know Lorna spoke about that yesterday, it's really easy to see how in any industry, from banking to insurance to your local shop maybe, you're going to have to confront these questions about like, how is data used? What part does that play? How do you understand it? What control do you have? So we really opened that up. The second thing was force a focus on UX. So this is kind of interesting. And I'm curious, I was most curious thinking at this point when I thought about this audience. Because we started with probably a more service design approach. And it was really compelling. We had those light bulb moments. We were really great at speaking the same language, getting people focused on the big challenges, thinking about that really broadly and openly, getting out of their kind of small problem areas and sharing a problem area for the first time. But when it came to producing outputs that you could take and say they stand here and then continue to build upon, it fell short. It was like a great experience for people, but it didn't quite get to, so it was, from design to delivery, we were like dropping off a little bit. And as we evolved, we realized that we needed to narrow the scope and constrain people more in order to start building things that we could use to build a foundation of knowledge. And that was really about pushing people to focus on the UX. Because a lot of the challenges, whether the problem is there, the expression of them is in the user interface. That can take a lot of different forms. For us, it's often in apps and services. But if you think about where it interacts with the user, that's a really good point to start thinking about like what the foundational levels of knowledge are and to build like building blocks of agreed knowledge in different contexts. So the ways we did that were initially then moving from like, let's look at this broadly and build kind of concepts and goals within a sprint to assigning people to specific kind of like theoretical app areas and saying, you're looking at a newspaper, you're looking at a social media service, you're looking at a bank. And to then evolving that further to giving people like actually kind of apps we made up. It was really fun actually, it's one of the most fun things I've done. We made up about initially 10 different abstract apps services from like food delivery to car sharing to social media to banking that people use most frequently and said, let's make up a version of this that no one feels political about. So no one is saying, no, we did that this way because of this reason, or you can't touch that, that's our service. Instead said, this belongs to nobody, we just made it up in a day, and we gave them really, really detailed sketch assets and said, this is what you're building on, like delete a screen, move an element, but we've given you everything you need to get straight into focusing on the problem. And you can break things apart, you can examine the whole problem set, but frankly, it's not as, if we know there are billions of different services people use, and that moment of interaction is really poor, it is legitimate, and it's real, and it's honest, and it's useful to focus on that and actually building something within that moment. You can question the ecosystem, that's great, but let's also solve the problem we have today. And one that's based on lots of services people use and value. And we moved from there to creating kind of like this wide array of different assets. We had a lot of fun with the names. Munchbox is our food delivery app. Friendly is our social media app. Oink is a digital bank because it's like a piggy bank. Fanfare for music. Ditto is voice assistant. Idle. And we have about 20 more. These are all available, by the way, on our site, which I'll speak about a little later. But if you ever think, I'd love to have an app to just prototype on, here you go. They're really quite good, actually. And they're all built by Facebook product designers who are having a really fun, creative couple of weeks in work. And we've actually moved from there all the way into like offering a service with specific kind of interfaces already, lots of like open space in and around it, to then actually offering like a specific uses of data that it has. Because what we tended to find was people were kind of going into the sprints and saying, what if I kind of re-engineer this in my head so that there's no data used by a service? And that may be a great idea. And and it might be legitimate, but again, if it comes to like producing something in a sprint and going on to delivery, it's kind of like a great kind of trick or a turnaround, but that doesn't solve, again, the problem that is very real and legitimate, which is that lots of services do use data and their interfaces really suck, and people don't understand how they work or have control. So we kind of got more focused again and said, this service, here's how it works, here are all the assets, here's everything you need, so you don't have to like design anything from the ground up. Here are the specific kind of challenges that you offer. And when we think about the use of data in that context, it's a little bit about like, these are kind of problems you need to solve. How do you help people understand this? How do you do this in a really delightful way? How do you move from that left-hand side of the screen of like, here's a legal document over to the right and think about a sophisticated and thoughtful and dynamic interface? And then we localized. So we thought about like, what are all the different markets? How do people use services differently? And if we're in Seoul or in Buenos Aires or in Singapore, what's different to how people use their services in San Francisco, in Paris, in Berlin? And like quite a lot, right? Certain classes of apps and services don't really exist. Others are used really, really differently. And that was really helpful, and it helped people to really identify with the services and say, okay, you've made this up, but it's just like X service that I use. And we're like, yeah, that's great, because we copied that. we used that to help us understand. So lesson 3 was to build specialized tools. When we entered this, we were working with the broad toolkit of design thinking. We were quite sophisticated because we were doing lots of internal work, and we had great product designers, great service designers inside Facebook, and we were working with outside. I know, is Marcus, are you here today? Marcus, we worked a lot with Marcus and the group at Workplay Experience, who were amazing and helped us kick off the project. And Marcus, I'm really looking forward to your talk later, which everyone should be around for because they're superstars. But we also realized that as useful as those tools were, and as well refined as they often can be to approach almost any problem, when it comes to those specific challenges around like people and privacy and data, there were also some specific tools that were lacking. So we thought about things like, what does a persona look like for data? We built profiles, and we had kind of problem sets, but like there were different kinds of questions, small kind of nudges, but that were helpful for helping an audience understand a persona in that context. We built specialized tools for workshops where there's thinking about, when in the user flow a person might experience different types of information for a particular app or service that help people quickly to understand like a user journey. And again, remember, we have like a designer here and a lawyer here, and they're trying to find kind of a common vision. And then we thought about like, how do you kind of put the tools of the trade of a UX designer at the fingertips of somebody who's maybe not used to working in that space at all, and who, the great thing actually in this area is people use apps and services all the time. So they're really quite good at understanding what works and what doesn't. It's not like a total surprise, thank you. But they often kind of forget the interactions that they're used to and need to be reminded. So we built these decks of cards about, so whether it's about like different interactions or tone and how you develop content strategy for an app or a service around data, or what kinds of interactions and gestures you could use, and built a load of exercises around that. And similarly, again, I'm not sure if these are on the site yet, but they will be. I built them into a deck of cards, and we have several decks of cards that can be used in different ways. And again, I just challenge you to think, in any service design effort that you're working on, if you're thinking about data, transparency, trust, control, and you're working with a group for whom those are difficult concepts, or for whom the tools of designing for that are challenging, these kind of mechanisms can be useful. And they've been done in like a million other areas, but not actually done that much for this space. So this was not innovative, but still new and novel. Next was we decided to share everything. So we built a platform called TTC Labs.net, which you should wait 10 minutes if you have a break, and then visit and have a look at it. It's an online resource basically around all of this content, these ideas, the work that we've been doing, to explore, develop, share practices and resources for new design patterns and templates. You can see the designs, the actual outputs from the hacks that are synthesized. These were all produced inside Design Jams. You can get kind of the story of how we've done that, which we've gotten better at doing, so better at creating the workshop to think about sharing of the platform afterwards as we've worked, which is not trivial. You can see the tool library, so see the tools that we're working with. We have a V2 of this that we're working on at the moment because at the moment there's lots of content, but it doesn't work that well. I'll be frank about that. But then things like the business design templates, lots of things to pull and grab, and especially the specialized tools I really recommend. And then insights articles. So the experts we were working with, whether that was our collaborators in the D School, people like Marcus and the amazing team, academics we were collaborating with, and people inside Facebook who were working in this space. So some kind of thought leadership, thought provocation, some ideas to try to understand this. And then the final lesson, and this isn't really a lesson because I don't even have a picture to go with this. I think I do actually. Hang on. This is amazing. That's it. That's all it does. But was to stop looking for the one idea. Because as we delved into this area, it became really clear that it felt like everyone, but especially lawyers whose core mechanism is like to find the single format that solves the legal problem, and then to replicate it over and over again. And that's really understandable, again, if you think about like how lawyers work and what their jobs are, because mostly they're thinking about like risk. How can I lower the level of legal risk that exists? So if that's the case, then you find the thing that's worked, and as a good designer, you should take that and like iterate on it a little bit and see if it works better, and then you lock it down and you don't let anyone touch it. But it became really clear that as you work in that area, there isn't a single answer. Like context is incredibly helpful. It's really like, can I do great design work, and can I build a transparent and trustful experience that builds on what people understand and know about the services they're using, and understands their expectations and understands where in the journey they are and thinks about that really kind of deeply. So what we've tried to avoid doing is ever creating like, these are the 10 principles of data transparency, or these are the 5 things you need to do, because it's not as simple as that. And there's an enormous amount of like good ideas that need to thrive, bad ideas that need to be tried and failed, and fail. And a lot of experimentation that needs to happen and be encouraged in the meantime before we could ever really get to a point of saying like, this is what works, because we're a long way away from it. And sometimes because of a lack of effort and a lack of motivation, but very often because of a lack of innovation. Because at the moment the ecosystem doesn't encourage it, and it's desperately needed. Oh no, I pressed the wrong button, 1 second. Yeah, I know, you get this one again. I thought you would appreciate it. We can have it a third time if you like. So what's next? I'm going to just throw 2 ideas out there. So if we think again about that idea of like, how would you service design an ecosystem? We thought about things like bringing the groups together, breaking down those silos, sharing specialized tools that help people to kind of build from a level, getting focused on the specific problems that exist today, rather than kind of like theoretical solves that required re-engineering like whole cohorts of billions of people. I hope that I've offered like a bit of a glimpse of how we've thought about it, but only as like this is stuff that we're doing because we think it's the right things or we've gotten feedback about it. But something we're thinking about next is like, how might we change the timescale? So if you think about that experience of like when people actually experience this stuff, it's really focused on like the first 10 seconds of using a new service. And almost all of our attention is based on making that 10 seconds better. But what if we thought about it as 10 years of learning about how data works, about how your services work? And there will be 10 years. Like no matter what way you spin it, we've been doing this for 10 years already. We're going to do it for 10 more, and 100 more, and probably 1,000 more. So we really need to make that better. But we could think about not ever giving up and giving people the best information up front, because that's a really important and noble objective, and people need to know that to have control and make good decisions. But we also need to think like, if we were giving people a curriculum of data and the data-driven economy and services, it wouldn't be about making the first 10 minutes of the first class awesome. It would be saying, what does like 5 years of school look like? And how do you space out the information and have it build on top of itself? And that's kind of absent at the moment. It's not, and it's really understandable why people don't work on it, but that's probably where a lot of the good space is. And then secondly, how might we look across services? So just like we're looking at the first 10 seconds, we're also looking at single individual services that are often using the same kind of practice, and they're communicating the same thing over and over again. So we get the same like little bit of chunk of information in this service, and they go, that's what I can tell my users. They really want to get to the service. They have limited time. Those things are really true, by the way. Like people don't love delving into this stuff or want to spend like loads of time on it. But what if we think about the ecosystem people are inside and all the different services they use and how they could contribute to or build on or relate to each other in a way that contributes to understanding. And that, again, is not trivial because they're all different services and they have different kind of goals and different audiences. But that's, again, like a fertile space that should be considered. And it certainly can start being considered when we bring those different groups together into a space and start talking about the problems. And that's something we've been trying to do through the labs. So thank you. I'd only say, please join us on ttclabs.net. We're really open to collaborating with anyone and everyone. Many of you already, I think I've worked with Fjordians in like 4 continents at this stage. And many other awesome partners are the team in Normally, who are our partners for the jams, the team in Claro, who worked with us in the toolkit, the team at Workload Experience, who are here today, and who helped to do a lot of the service design thinking that kicked us off. But we'd love to work with you. And that's why I was so keen to join you today, because this is the perfect audience to say, like, well, first, like, what can we do better? How can we serve you? What can we offer you that would be really helpful in your own practice and work? Yeah, to ask you to connect with us. There's a mailing list, there's an email address, and please reach out to me either on Twitter or wherever else. Cool, thank you.